We'll talk about that.
It's quite poor. Hello and welcome, my name is Ian and this channel is all about music and art, and in this series of videos we've been looking at what is happening regarding the music streaming in the UK. The UK Government's Digital Culture, Media and Sports Committee have been looking into the ways that streaming platforms and large record companies manage payments to songwriters, musicians and performers. And on the 15th of October 2020, Parliament published a news article stating that the Digital Culture, Media and Sports Committee were going to inquire into the impact of the streaming on the future of the music industry. This article stated that the inquiry would consider whether the government should take action to protect the industry from piracy in the wake of steps taken by the EU on copyright and intellectual property rights. Now, I knew that some high-profile musicians and music industry types were going to be giving evidence to the committee. And the first of these meetings was on the 24th of November 2020. And it continued through December into January and February of this year, 2021. Now, these were long meetings lasting over 3 hours. So what I've done is I've edited them all down into shorter videos, and you can find a link to all the previous meeting videos in the description down below. I've also created an introduction for each section, and if you want to, you can skip straight past those bits to the questions by clicking on the timestamps. Again, all of this stuff is in the description. So in this video we'll look at the session from the 23rd of February 2021, and I thought it would be worth providing a short background to the witnesses giving evidence. So in this evidence session we have Paul Firth from Amazon, Horatio Guitares from Spotify and Elena Siegel from Apple Inc. Paul Firth took on the role of Director of Amazon Music International, responsible for non-US territories, in 2017. His previous position was as Director of Amazon Music Europe. London-based, Firth has worked at Amazon for nearly 10 years, starting off as Head of Buying for Music and MP3s at Amazon Music in 2011. Next we have Horatio Guitares, who is Spotify's General Counsel and Vice President of Business and Legal Affairs. Based at Spotify USA's headquarters in New York City, Horatio is responsible for overseeing Spotify's global legal, regulatory and government affairs, and serves as Corporate Secretary to its Board of Directors. And lastly, we have Elena Siegel, a wide respected figure in music industry circles. Elena was appointed as Apple's Music's first ever Global Director of Music Publishing in 2018. She's a qualified lawyer, originally joined Apple in 2006 after 4 years as an associate at a Los Angeles-based law firm. As legal director of iTunes International, she oversaw a range of legal and licensing matters for iTunes and Apple Music, and in 2015 she headed up global licensing for the launch of Apple Music itself. All sessions were chaired by Julia Knight, and the complete list of committee members and relevant links are in the description down below. This recording is made in agreement with the UK Parliament's terms and conditions, which state that I cannot alter the video or audio in any way. I can't use the material for satire or use it on a website or social media platform that promotes, encourages and facilitates illegal activity or encourage hatred and antisocial behaviour. So here is part 3 from the 23rd of February 2021 into the economics of music streaming. Damien Hines.
Thank you very much, Julian. And in this inquiry to date, we've focused mostly on the divvying up of the 70% of revenues from streaming services. But I think what's really interesting in this section is to look at the other half. That is why the revenue number is what it is and why the 70% is 70%, not 60% or 80%. And we're all familiar with the charts of global record industry sales over the last few decades. There was a huge peak and then a terrible trough. You don't nearly so often see figures that adjust for growth markets. So in other words, take a per capita view of revenue. Do any of you have data on how much the typical music-loving punter is spending on music in somewhere like Britain or North America today, not just compared to the trough, but to the peak of the music industry? It's an open question for anybody who has numbers to answer. You'll be the first in this inquiry who have been able to.
I'll share what we do have. Unfortunately, I don't have access to full market segment numbers, which I think is what you're searching to get towards. But earlier on, if you remember, I shared some numbers around Amazon and how Amazon could see its own numbers around.
Paul, forgive me cutting across you. I don't mean to be rude. No, that is not what I'm after at all. What I'm trying to understand is, there's a big debate going on about the way the revenue is being divvied up and whether that is fair, and why musicians are ending up with less money than they used to have. What I'm trying to get to is, mathematically, is that entirely because of the divvying up, or is it because of the number that is being divvied up? And so far as I can make out, nobody seems to have this data. Is that true? Horatio?
I have a few figures. I don't know that they directly answer your question, but I think help put some boundaries around it. And this may be an area where we could try to come up with some data. You have to look at the economic impact in the UK from two perspectives. Number one, the consumption in the UK and the value of the royalties that are generated by consumption by the UK public. But then I think more significantly, we focused on UK talent and how much revenue they can generate globally, right? In the UK, we know for Spotify alone that in 2020, we generated more than 550 million euros. Unfortunately, because our accounting is in euros, I don't have it in pounds, but that is just for consumption in the UK, the royalties that were paid there. But we also know that we have numbers that indicate sort of the growth of the British music industry over the last few years. Since we launched in the UK in 2009, the number of songwriters has increased, from 115%. The number of artists has increased 145%. There were only 5 UK major labels 20 years ago. We licensed music for 750 right holders in the UK today. So in a sense, what's happened is there were sort of a handful of gatekeepers in the industry. And what this new paradigm has created is, in a sense, democratize access to streaming by allowing a number of other players to actually have their music distributed on a global basis.
Although, of course, the flip side of that is, with a fixed price per consumer, that means there's fewer people. There's more recipients than to have revenue distributed between.
That is correct, but let me just pardon me, but let me just add one thing. It is true. On the other hand, the model has allowed British artists to find paying users in markets that in the past they didn't have. For every stream in the UK, 4 streams happen outside of the UK.
So I'm absolutely not here to dispute that. I'm just trying to understand the way that the way the numbers work. Can we just, and staying with you, if I may, Horatio, coming on to the 30%, 70% revenue split from. So where did that 30% number come from originally?
I don't have the historical knowledge on how that actually happened in the negotiation rooms, and I think it happened over time. The reality is that labels demanded a majority of the revenue to go to them, and then we had to clear the rights with publishers around the world. The rates for publishing historically were actually lower than they were today. I think there's testimony even in the context of these hearings that it's gone from an 8% rate to a 15% rate over the years, if I'm not mistaken. So some rates have stabilized, other rates have actually grown over the years, and we've ended up around that area. Some of it was decided on those initial agreements. Some of it, some of this evolved over the years.
Do you have a sense, or this could go to any of the three witnesses, do you have a sense of what the physical distribution costs are per song compared to what they were in the old days of people going down to HMV or R price?
So not quite sure what you mean by physical distribution, since there isn't physical distribution.
No,
anymore.
quite. The cost of production, distribution, basically getting the music into the hands, or in this case, I suppose, the ears, physically of the punter.
So in our case, we know that about 10% of our global revenue in 2020 went into research and development. I don't have a specific breakout with numbers, but I know, for example, their cloud cost associated with our having our content hosted by cloud providers, in our case being Google, but other people use Amazon, other people may use other services. Those costs are quite significant. They're clearly sales and marketing costs associated with a launch in a market and the promotion of the content or things like that.
But that's in a different category. There certainly are, and we may have a chance to come on to market share growth and customer acquisition costs. I mean, it is interesting, fascinating, some might say, that with the relatively low physical distribution costs that exist, how your company is not profitable. I mean, presumably this is because of huge amounts of money going into sales and marketing to grow share.
Well, actually, if you talk about distribution, the world of physical distribution that existed before, when you had to print a vinyl record, you had to package it, you had to ship it, you had to store it, you had to put it in a retail store, you had to market it almost on a retail basis with radio stations. Those were costs that labels undertook. And as the internet has allowed for frictionless distribution, those costs have been driven out of the equation. And that has, for the most part, just goes straight to the bottom line of labels that have benefited from that. Of course, on the other hand, they faced other challenges and emerging competition from independent labels and do-it-yourself artists. So they also have their own challenges, but the reality is that was not a cost saving that we realized. It was a cost saving that labels realized.
So if the record labels are able to pocket the savings from production, retail distribution, point of sale, and all the rest of it, what's the equivalent in the record label's former P&L? What's the equivalent to the 30% of revenue that's going to you?
Maybe I could come in here, because I've been involved in entertainment retail all my working life, all the way back to the time behind record shop counters and selling at Amazon, but also now running a streaming service. So I can think about this question across a number of different angles. And I think one of the key things to realize is that during that transition, there's also been a bit of a transition of who does what. So when we are a retailer, we still sell CDs and vinyl. Really, we are fulfilling a demand that is created elsewhere. So the marketing, the discovery, what drives someone to look for that artist generally happens somewhere else. Someone else carries the cost for that. But actually, with a streaming service, we're part of that process too. So streaming services are very much about driving discovery. They're very much about marketing artists as well as marketing their own service. So some of the cost is also transferred into streaming services from what was done before, because there's this blurring of the lines over who does what. And I think as a streaming service, you play a much more active role in helping an artist break than we ever did as a retailer. We play a much more active role in helping music lovers discover artists that they'll love, and also helping artists connect with their maximum fan base possible. Those are the things we aim to try and do. So I do think that some of the costs have moved around quite a lot in this model from the time when I look at our CD and vinyl store to when I look at our streaming store.
Okay, if we had longer, we could probably have a good discussion about what the real cost of introducing people to new music is if they're already subscribing to your system. But we don't have more time, so I'm going to move on, Paul, if I may. Can I ask you what percentage of your users, and Naresh, I'd like to ask you the same question in a moment, what percentage of your users are subscription paying, specifically for the music service? And in any year, what proportion of them upgrade to paying? Sorry, of those who are not paying, those who are on the free service, what proportion upgrade to paying a subscription? Paul.
So for Amazon Music, we have Amazon Music Unlimited, which is our full catalogue on-demand streaming service, the equivalent to the ones that are run by other services. We do already have an HD tier. I know Horacio mentioned that earlier for Spotify for the future, but we have that in place already. But we also run something called Prime Music, which offers Prime members access to a very limited catalogue. It's around 2 million songs, so quite a lot less than the full catalogue service. And that comes as part of their Prime membership. They're paying for that as part of their Prime membership, of course. And we very recently, only a year or so ago, launched a small ad-funded tier, which again has got a small amount of songs, and it's around 2 million songs. I don't have the precise splits in front of me. The vast majority we do not have many customers in our ad-funded tier at this stage. It's still quite new. The majority of our customers are in Amazon Music Unlimited. What I'll do actually, if it's okay, Mr. Hines, is I'll write to you with a more accurate breakdown rather than me to try and do it off the top of my head here. Prime Music's been running slightly longer than Amazon Music Unlimited, but Amazon Music Unlimited is growing much faster.
Thank you. We'd appreciate that. And also, when you are right, could you also say how you apportion revenues? So obviously, if you buy Prime, you're buying a bundle, which also includes films and parcel delivery. So how you allocate revenue to the music part of the service would be very helpful. Horacio, can I ask you the same question about the split between free and subscription paying? And in any, I forgot to press you, Paul. Maybe we'll get a chance in a moment. Horacio, also the proportion of people in any 1 year who are not paying who upgrade to the premium service.
So we have 155 million subscribers. That's a figure that we released as of December 31, 2020. And we have 345 million monthly active users. So that gives you a sense of the overall number of users, including free, as well as the portion that subscribes. So it's a number that is quite significant. We know that about 60% of subscribers were people that started using the service on the ad-supported tier and then were successfully converted into the subscription tier. So we know that it is quite an effective funnel of users that first begin with the free tier and then convert into full subscriptions.
Sorry, forgive me if I didn't follow entirely the first part of your answer. I think you were saying how many were fee paying and how many were not. Could you just give us those numbers again?
Yes, and by the way, those figures are public. They're released in our annual accounts. But it's 155 million subscribers. That is people paying subscription.
Who are paying,
fees, correct? And then 345 million MAUs, or monthly active users, which is a measure that's used in services like ours to measure the total number of users of a service. And
in Life's Great Venn diagram, sorry, the first figure is a subset of the second figure. Is that right?
Correct. That's correct.
Okay. So I haven't done the maths in my head, but it's a substantial proportion. But it's certainly not the overwhelming majority who are paying.
Well, think of it as there's 155 million subscribers and 199 million ad-supported users.
Okay, thank you. And can you tell us a bit more about how the free service works, starting with who decides what goes on it? Is that the choice of the record label in every case, which artists are only on the paid for service and which tracks within each act?
Well, in our case, in the free service, the selling proposition that we have is that even though it may be a service that adds more friction, obviously has ad interruptions and a number of things that make it somewhat less enjoyable service, we offer the full range of catalog that we offer in the subscription tier, but we offer it in free. Now, there are a number of restrictions of, the users cannot listen offline. There's a limit on the number of times they could listen to certain tracks. So there are a number of restrictions that are there to persuade and incent the user to upgrade to the subscription tier. And by the way, over the years, we've refined those terms. Those are negotiated with major labels and with publishers. And we feel that we've had, and I think our partners would say so too, quite a healthy conversion rate from the ad-supported tier into subscription. And a lot of the driver of this is that there is limited on-demand capabilities. I mean, the ability of a user to play a particular track of a particular artist on demand is very limited. And that is really a key feature that drives users to want to upgrade to the subscription tier.
And how does the remuneration work? Do you effectively pay a different amount to the record label for a song heard through the free versus the premium, or is it all just melded together and then divvied up at the end of the year, or how does it happen?
So we have revenue share agreements on both sides. We have revenue share agreements on the subscription side. So there's a pool of revenue that comes from the monthly subscriptions that we receive, and those get allocated on a pro rata share among the different labels, and then they do in turn the same thing with their creators. And likewise, on the advertising revenue on the free tier, we have revenue share agreements with respect to the revenue that we generate on the free tier, and it works the same, except that one is based on the subscription revenue pool and the other one is based on the advertising revenue pool.
And in terms of the actual revenue, whether it's subscription revenue or ad revenue per song, what's the difference between how much money you're making for every song played on the paid for and on the free?
I don't happen to have that. Let me just say this. We have public information that dissects all of this in the context of the filings that we do with the Securities and Exchange Commission. We would be happy to submit that. The actual numbers I don't happen to have right in front of me. Obviously, the revenue is lower on the ad-funded tier. That is so by definition. The way we look at it and the way we encourage, obviously, our partners to look at it is, as I said, as a highly successful funnel on finding users that previously were not paying for music to on-ramp into our service and then to go further into subscription. In terms of the overall split, about 90% of our revenue comes from the subscription business and 10% of our revenue comes from the ad-funded tier.
So obviously every person who signs up to the free service, that is, in a sense, it's a revenue loss in the sense that you haven't signed them up to premium. So there's an opportunity cost to that person. But is there any actual cost to you running a lost lead and marketing program like this?
Well, the way we look at it, it's a funnel into the overall revenue. So
we know that's how you look at it. We know that's how you look at it.
So that they're obviously.
But it's buying your market share, isn't it? That's the point. It's funding your market share, and you're not taking the risk on it.
We, unlike other companies who can build on their Prime subscription audience, or they can build on their iPhone installed base, or their home speakers, or things like that. The only thing we have to be able to find these customers and attract them into our service is our free service. And especially as we launch in markets, in emerging economies where there's a high potential in terms of users, but are economically challenged, it is a highly efficient way of monetizing music in markets where piracy would have been rampant just a few years ago. So in fact, it contributes to growing the pie in a very significant way. But yes, I mean, the freemium aspects of our service are a critical element for us. We think it was an innovation as important for us as some of the technological innovations that enabled streaming to work. And it is a fundamental element of the value proposition that we think has proven successful over the years.
And finally, can I ask each of you, if there was no YouTube, would you have a free streaming service? Start with Horatio, as we're with you now. If there was no YouTube, would you have a free service?
I think for the same reason, the same logic that I provided before, I think we would. But there is no question that we see YouTube as a competitor, particularly in...
Sorry, no question in that you definitely do, or no question in that you definitely don't?
I think we would continue to have it as a way of finding users to put into our.
Sorry. Forgive me. When you said there's no question that we see YouTube as a competitor, I mean, do you mean we obviously do see them as a competitor, or they are so different we obviously don't see them as a competitor? That's my question.
No, they're obviously a competitor to our service. People in some markets look at the YouTube service as a substitute for their music consumption. So that is a challenge for us too. But I think I do believe that the freemium service has value on its own, and it obviously would be hypothetical, and I would be speculating, but I would be surprised if we didn't have a freemium model, even in the scenario where YouTube didn't exist.
Thank you. And Paul, taking Prime out of it, just looking at your ad-funded free model, if there were no YouTube, would it exist? You can be very brief.
Yeah, I think it would.
Thank you. And Eleanor, I know your model is different, but how would the world change for Apple if there were no YouTube?
Well, I think the world would change in that I think more people would probably be using Apple Music, but it wouldn't change our service. We don't think that an ad supported service can generate enough revenue to support a healthy overall ecosystem. And it would also really go against our fundamental values on privacy.
Thank you. Back to you, Jenna.
Thank you. Steve Bryan?
Thanks, Chair. Can I just go back to the very start? I just want to ask Eleanor and Paul a question which John Nicholson put to Spotify about the dynamic here. Eleanor, with regards to your streams, do you see it as a rental or a sale?
We see it as a license. We have a right. We have licenses that entitle us to sub-license to consumers, and that's been true. I mean, that's always been true.
So it's it's a rental, because if I license something, I'm having that service for as long as I have the license.
If you think back to the purchase of a CD was a license as well. You're purchasing a piece of plastic, and you're purchasing a piece of plastic, and you're purchasing a license to use the music that's on that piece of plastic in certain ways. And if you read the small print on the back of the liner notes, there are terms and conditions. So it's always been a license. It is as others have said, it's a license that ends when you're no longer a subscriber.
Yeah, but when I have my CD, it didn't stop me listen. It didn't limit the number of listens I could have, did it? Once I bought it,
no, it did not.
So I didn't license it or rent it. I bought it. It was a sale. It's different. It's not the same. It was
the sale of a license, I would say, and this is a subscription to a license. I would say it's more akin to a rental. I'm not going to comment on sort of legal connotations of that.
Yeah, more akin to a rental. Okay, Paul, Amazon, do you see it as a rental or a sale?
I think it's very clear to me that it's neither of those things, that stream is something different, and that trying to qualify it as something from an old world isn't really helpful. It's a classic round peg or square peg, round hole moment, rather. So from our point of view, it's neither of those things. I agree with what Eleanor says there. You know, we run a CD store, we run an MP3 download store, and we run a streaming service. We have different agreements with our record label partners for each of those. Right at the top of the agreement for the streaming service, it describes itself as a license, and it does give us the ability to make that repertoire available to our subscribers as long as they continue to pay a subscription. But I think it is something different than either of those concepts.
I'm not surprised you agree. It has been said before in some of our earlier sessions that you all do tend to you hunt together. So it is not surprising to me that you agree. Let me go back to Spotify, Horatio. Right back at the start of this inquiry, we had evidence from Nadine Shah. I'm sure you know of her work. This is what she said to our inquiry. It's on the record in Hansard. She said, as an artist with a substantial profile, a substantial fan base, critically acclaimed, I don't make enough money from streaming. I'm in a position now where I'm struggling to pay my rent. I'm embarrassed to talk about these issues publicly. I'm a successful musician, but I'm not being paid fairly for the work that I make. Often, artists are encouraged not to ask these questions. How do you feel, given that you're the head of global affairs and chief legal officer for Spotify, how do you feel when you hear that from an artist like Nadine Shah?
Well, obviously, it's unfortunate that she feels that way, but I think there are a couple of things that need to be clarified. I don't know what agreements she has with labels and publishers. I don't know what the economic terms are of the split of the revenue that she might have agreed to with her label. I know what we pay, and I know that close to 70% of every pound that we generate gets paid to those intermediaries that represent artists. I also know that over the last 4 years, based on our data, the number of recorded artists whose catalogs generated more than $1 million a year from a recording and publishing perspective grew over 82%, and the number of artists that generated more than $100,000 a year grew 79% over the last 4 years. So I know that streaming is having a positive economic impact on artists, but you have to recognize that when you look at the economics of streaming, you have to look at the different actors in the value chain and how the money trickles down from what comes out of streaming and ultimately makes it into artists and musicians in general.
Okay, they're good figures. They're big figures. I'll give you that. But let's then break it down. So maybe the reason why Ms. Shah says that to us is because of ARPU, average revenue per user. You talked earlier about growing the size of the cake, the pie. Why then, if the size of the economy is getting bigger, do the per stream rates go down?
Well,
this is one of the big claims that is made by the campaigns around this, some of the evidence that we've heard. Why do those rates therefore go down?
Well, I think a large part of it is the result of the introduction of family plan programs. Basically, there's more users that, part of a family that can enjoy it. And, we tend to pay a fraction of what we would pay if we counted each individual family member as a subscriber. But that's no different than in the physical world. If somebody bought a record of David Bowie and brought it home, you didn't buy a record per family member. You bought a single record for the whole family to enjoy. But from a per user perspective, clearly the revenue would be lower. The other thing that I would say with the per stream rate, and I know there's a tremendous amount of focus of per stream, is that we don't pay out based on per stream. They pay out based on a revenue share. It actually might be better if we paid out on a per stream basis. We would have better opportunities to actually generate bigger margin, but that is not the way the industry has evolved over the years. The fans don't pay per listen anymore. They're paying for access. And this is what happens when you try to use this imputed per stream rate in the context of access. You end up making the wrong decisions. You undervalue the really valuable users. And let me explain why. A user that pays $9.99 per month and only listens to one song is not as valuable to us or, frankly, to artists as a user that pays $9.99 and listens to 500 songs. A more engaged user is a user that is likely to stay in the service longer. The long-term value of that user is higher, which means the monetization value for artists on our service is bigger. Yet, a user that listens to a track or tracks 500 times would yield a lower per stream rate because you're dividing the $9.99 by the number of streams that they did. So the caution that I would offer is we're trying to use metrics that apply to different models and apply them to an access model for music where they really don't work out as well. I continue to point out to the fact that we've paid over 20 billion euros since the foundation of the company, that we paid 5 billion euros in 2020 alone. The payouts continue to grow. the streaming payouts are what's bringing total music revenues up. You need only look at the empirical evidence to know that the streaming music paradigm is actually paying out and is contributing to bringing the music industry back into health.
Yeah, no, this is very interesting. This is why the inquiry is called The Economics of Music Streaming. And you have given a very interesting exposition there of the economics of your business model. And just to ask you finally, that this Spotify Hi-Fi that you launched, is it this week at the tech event?
We announced that we will be launching in
you will be launching it. So yes. What is that going to cost?
The actual terms are not defined yet. We haven't announced them. It will be obviously a higher subscription price than the base subscription price.
I guess the thing is, you see, because when we're talking about artists and one of the writers, one of the writers who's written many big hits, told the BBC this week that she knows many people are driving Uber cars to make ends meet at the moment. And, you're talking about Spotify Hi-Fi, which obviously will be a big revenue generator for you. I presume that Meghan and Harry, remember them, we're trying to forget, that presumably they're not doing it all for free for you. So you're probably paying them quite a lot of money. Can you see how that slightly sticks in the craw of some of the artists that are driving Uber cars right now to pay their rent? Yes, correct me if they are doing it for free. That would be very, very good of them.
No, they're not doing it for free. I think like a lot of our services, there is a market for certain talent because they command a certain amount of consumption. We're talking about the podcast market. That's a market that's different than the music market. We don't get to negotiate directly with artists in the music space the way we negotiate directly with podcasters or people who create podcasts. So the structure of that market is very different. I will tell you that the podcast side of the business is not commanding 70% of our revenues either. So, podcasters in general, the monetization has been very poor. We believe we have an opportunity to make it better and provide more opportunities to podcasters to do it. But that is a completely different set of economics. And frankly, one of the things that makes it attractive to us is that it doesn't have the cost structure of the music industry, which means we have the ability to realize better margins in that business than we do in the music side of the business.
So why do it? Why pay Harry and Meghan all that money?
Well, it's at the end of the day, it goes back to attention economics, and the product is valued on the base of how many users it can attract, how many streams it will attract, which in turn determines how many advertisers are willing to advertise on the podcast, which determines the economic opportunity. There's a market that is emerging for talent in that regard. The music market, that happens at a different level. That tends to happen between artists and labels at the time of discovery of the talent.
In other words, they're box office. You see them as box office.
Yes, in terms of the talent that goes into podcasts, yes. Or if you were thinking about the video streaming world, you would think of House of Cards, or you would think of Game of Thrones, or you would think of those high production shows that tend to be the tentpoles that attract people into the service and therefore benefit everyone. And let me just say that there is clear evidence that we have developed that having podcast offerings on the service benefits music consumption. So on the whole, there's a virtuous cycle that occurs when you have the full offering of both music and non-music audio available on the service, that people on the whole would tend to consume more on the service.
So everybody benefits. So Harry and Meghan saved the music industry.
That seems a little bit premature. And they're not the only act that we've signed. We've signed dozens of those, and we'll continue to do that. We're trying to create a platform where everyone can find content that they find appealing, whatever their tastes.
Yeah, that's fascinating. Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Horatio. Thank you, Horatio. I really do enjoy the fact that you refer to Meghan and Harry as an act, I have to say. Very apt.
So thanks for watching. The next video will be a continuation of this session. Thanks very much. Bye-bye.